Okay, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Live from the Sword Coast podcast. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon user today. I'm just going to double check and make sure we are actually streaming, which it appears we are. So for those listening at home, if you're listening to this live, Merry Christmas to you. This is being recorded on Christmas morning while I am waiting for my son to stir. We had a very late night last night of playing Halo and watching Diehards. He had not actually seen any of the Diehards before, and so we watched the first two Diehards. But I wanted to quickly hop on while he is slumbering and resting that healthy dose of John McClane to talk about what, I guess, do a little reflection on what we played in 2018 on the channel and share with what I've got planned for 2019. So without further ado, let's jump in. So I made a list as a response to a Twitter chain that I saw, and it was asking you to list all the games that you had played in or run in 2018. And interestingly, I initially thought, well, I really haven't played all that many. And then on reflection, just because since about June or July-ish, it feels like we've been playing a lot of Barrel Maze, a lot of either Pathfinder playtest or Scarlet Heroes on the channel, and that's really been the extent of what we've been playing. But when I went back to the channel, I found that this year in 2018, we played Savage Worlds, Star Wars Fantasy Flight, Conan 2D20, Band of Blades, Adventurer Conqueror King, Scarlet Heroes, Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition, 4th Edition Dungeons & Dragons, Shadow the Demon Lord, Blood and Bone, 5th Edition Dungeons & Dragons, Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, 2nd Edition, Delta Green, Genesis, Mage 20, Cypher, so the Cypher system in general, Starfinder, Pathfinder, both 1st and 2nd Edition, Night's Black Agents, Mutant City Blues, Champions, Legend of the Five Rings, Savage Grifts, Godbound, Other Dust, and revised Stars Without Number. So that's a pretty healthy list of things that we went through. Now, when we started the last year on the channel, we had initially set up a schedule where we were going to be playing a regular ongoing campaign on certain Wednesdays, and then the alternate Wednesdays we were going to alternate games. And then we sort of fell out of that habit around June, around the time of my gaming marathon. And for those who are new to the channel, once a year I get together with friends back in my hometown of Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and we play about 16 hours of role-playing games, all one big, massive, either a series of short adventures or one long adventure, as we did in the past year. And after that, I kind of got not stuck, but I kind of fell into the pattern of running one game all over and over and over again on both our Wednesday sessions and our Friday sessions. The upside of this was we did get a lot of play in, and that's been a lot of fun. And people who, my players who have a more up in the air schedule lately, they had more opportunities to play. And, whatever day they were available, be it the Wednesdays or the Fridays. But now, so I'd like to change things up a little bit, and I'll tell you what I've got planned. So last year, I don't think I actually made a list of games that I want to bring to the table in 2018, or I wanted to bring to the table in 2018. I just sort of I did make a rough schedule for what we'd be playing when. And we did follow that for the most part, for the first little bit, but then I kept changing things. And one significant change that was made was the game I had planned for my gaming marathon. I've actually had 2 years now where I had initially planned to run Twilight 2000, the old Game Designers Workshop game that, or GDW game that was set in like a or a kind of like not retroactive, an anachronistic World War III post-apocalypse thing. It's a game I loved when I was a kid, but I ended up kiboshing that idea and ran Traveler to much success. I mean, I think Traveler 2nd Edition worked really well for the gaming marathon, and it was a lot of fun for myself to run and for everyone to play. But what I'm going to do this year is I'm going to try and set a hit list and to make a little more productive progress through my games. And actually gets more of the games that I've purchased and read and like to the table, both in an effort to give the folks listening at home exposure to new games, and also my players, because they a lot of my players like trying different games as well too. And for myself, I like getting different games to the table because I feel like I learned something from any game that you bring to the table if you're live to pick up lessons that can be learned from them, be they cautionary tales or models to follow. So let's talk about the games I'm going to play in 2019, or run, I should say, in 2019. I do want to play more in 2019. That's let's just get that out. I definitely want to play more, and I'm excited that it looks like we're going to be getting some of my old gaming friends from a Shadow of the Demon Lord game that was run back in 2017 by my buddy Jared Rasher. Jared and myself and Jason Hobbs are going to be playing in a game run by Mike Myler, another buddy of mine, who he's the author of Mists of Akuma and Hypercore 2099. He's going to run his newest setting, which is a 5th edition D&D setting for us, and that should be a lot of fun. Mike has a distinctly dark sensibility to it, so I'm looking forward to seeing what twisted shit we're going to get up to in that. But I'm also going to try and keep myself live to the opportunities to play other games as well too. I definitely want to play in Jason Hobbs's Kalmata game again. I've got an idiot mage that I play in that I really named Benton Reed III of the Carlsberg Reeds. And I adore playing that character. He is such a dummy. And he's a first level mage, so I imagine he's not long for this world, but I do enjoy playing him and look forward to playing him again. And I guess one other thing I'll talk about 2018, one thing that I'm very proud of is that thanks to the very generous viewers and players that we have on the channel, we met and exceeded our fundraising goal to raise $1,000 for the SOS Children's Villages International charity. That was something that I kind of had a bit of a moral crisis, I suppose, partway through the year due to the particular author of one particular game, and the way I decided to resolve that was to try and set up this charity, and I'm very happy to report that the charity was successful thanks to the very, very kind viewers that we have on the channel and players in my campaigns as well too. And to that end, we've so far to date run one charity session that was a reward that was claimed in it. But early in the new year, I have charity sessions running Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea again. I have a charity session of the Iron Kingdoms role-playing game that's going to be coming up. And I have a charity session of the Savage Worlds setting Rippers. So it's a cool kind of like pulpy street superhero thing set with classic monsters and monster hunters in the streets of Victorian, well, not London necessarily, but the Victorian world. So that seems like a lot of fun. And I'm going to be revamping that campaign over the break as well to get that back live. And I'd like to bring that. I want to find more constructive ways to try and both deliver rewards to people. We've had one really interesting reward claimed, which was to introduce an NPC. For $20, you could work with me to come up with an NPC and an interesting secret that we'd introduce into the Barrow Maze campaign. And that character has become a signature, a real, not signature, but a fixture of that campaign, and a really great addition. So I'm going to try and find more ways to let folks find rewards that will actually key to the games we're playing on the channel. What else here? So then, that's the charity games we've got coming up for sure early in the new year and first quarter, as they say. And then in terms of the other games that I want to play, obviously I want to continue running my Barrow Maze campaign. I'm having a lot of fun with that, and we're 20 at the time of recording. I think we're 26 or 27 sessions in, which is no small thing. And the guys have made some progress into the Barrow Maze. We had a couple distractions with people pursuing other plot lines, or recovering from the death of a PC, or exploring this flying city that I introduced briefly as an homage to game creator Carl Sargent. And we'll be continuing that on. That will be on our Friday. Alternate Fridays, we're playing that for 4 hours. And then the Wednesdays the Wednesdays of the week when we are not playing on Friday, we will be playing Barrow Maze as well. So that means that so my camera's really going crazy with the focus today. What's going on, camera? Boom. There we go. All right. Maybe I should stop moving. That will probably solve things. So we are yeah, we're going to be playing basically a Barrel Maze once a week. So every week we will be playing Barrel Maze either on Wednesdays or on Fridays. Wednesdays for 2 hours, Fridays for 4 hours. I'm also launching a bi-weekly Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea campaign called, well, I've been calling it Orphans of Hyperborea because I like the idea that, you know, if folks don't have a regular gaming group where they're able to play Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, it's an opportunity for them to jump in and to play. So it's an open table game. There's going to be a cap of 5 players because I think that's probably enough to get enough stuff done without slowing things down too much. And that will be played on the Saturdays on the weeks when we are not playing on Friday. So I have a chance to actually prep for those sessions as well. We are also going to be doing a monthly, so there's a monthly game we are trying to set up, and that will be a little bit of a longer thing. And it'll be Saturday nights. We'll be streaming that, and we'll be streaming that as an in-person game as well. This is something where I think it's going to be either Delta Green or Call of Cthulhu. I really like this Mask of Nyarlathotep or Nyarlathotep box set that I picked up recently, and I really would like to run that. It's got some really cool handouts and stuff like that, and I'd like to do a review of it at some point, but I do want to get it to the table before I do that. And that would be something that we might play in person here in Calgary, so that would be a lot of fun. Or alternatively, we'll run Delta Green, the kind of Lovecraft meets X-Files game. I really love that game a lot, and I'm making my way through the game, or what is it called, the Marshal's Handbook? Handler's Guide, right now in an effort to get this, or get myself inspired and ready to run that campaign, as well as to do a review of it, because I did do a review of the Agent's Handbook last year. So apart from those regular games, then the games that we're going to cycle through, which will either be on our Wednesdays when we are not playing the Barrel Maze, so it'll be the Wednesdays when we play Barrel Maze on Friday, or other pickup games, because I tend to schedule stuff throughout the year as well. These games include Traveler 2nd Edition from Mongoose Publishing. That's for a sci-fi game. It's a game I love. I think all the products that have come out for that so far have been really, really great. Godbound, the game by Cindy Nomine Publishing, of playing basically like fantasy, in a fantasy setting, playing demigods. That's written by Kevin Crawford as well. Revised Stars Without Number. Now, Revised Stars Without Number is something that what I'm going to do is use some of the Starfinder stuff that I've got for setting material, because I love the setting material for Starfinder, but I'm having a real hard time engaging with the rules. I find them a little overly complicated, and Revised Stars Without Number just released a pretty awesome source book called Codex of the Black Sun that deals with space magic. And now that I've got space magic and the complete Revised Stars Without Number, I think I'm going to start using some of this stuff here, the Starfinder stuff, to get that into play. I'm also going to get Adventurer Conqueror King back to the table. Adventurer Conqueror King, for those who are unfamiliar, is basically an OSR game that is based heavily on the BECMI, the Basic Expert Companion Master Immortal version of the D&D rules. It's, I think, apart from Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, which is a very distinct game, as far as generic games go, I think Adventure Conqueror King is my favorite of the OSR games. I absolutely love the products. I think they're great. And the optional rules, not optional, but the rules they have for creating classes is fucking awesome. Like, for an old school GURPS and Champions player, it's just something I really love. So I'm going to get that back to the table. In particular, the Barbarian Conquerors of Kanahu setting. This is the setting that was created by Omer Joel. And again, Omer, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but it's basically kind of like, all the coolest bits of Dark Sun and Thundercats and He-Man all thrown together into a campaign, and it's awesome. It's so great. Delta Green I mentioned, and Call of Cthulhu are going to be games I'm going to get to the table as well. Shadow of the Demon Lord is actually one of the first games we're going to get back to the table. We've got 2 players in our regular campaign who have not played Robert Schwab's amazing horror fantasy game, Shadow of the Demon Lord. I've run that quite a bit in the channel over the last couple of years, and we're going to be running the first Freeport adventure. Last year, or maybe the year before, they successfully kickstarted. When I say they, I mean Robert Schwalb successfully kickstarted the conversion to Shadow the Demon Lord for Freeport, including a Freeport companion. We're going to be using that to run a 3-level adventure, Death in Freeport. We're also going to get back to Legend of the Five Rings at some point. I really enjoyed the one-shot. It was 2 sessions, but it was a one-shot adventure that we ran for that about 2 months ago, maybe. And I love Rokugan. For those who are unfamiliar with Legend of the Five Rings, it's a game of basically heroic fantasy Japan with the serial numbers filed off. I have loved that game or that setting basically since the original card game. I came into the game just after Anvil of Despair at the time of Crimson and Jade, and totally fell in love with the game with the release of Time of the Void. We ran that for years before the role-playing game, and now the newest edition is really, really, really good, published by Fantasy Flight, and the guys really enjoyed it. So I think I definitely need to get that back to the table. So those are games that, and another game that I have played this year that I need to get back to the table is Champions. Champions is the hero system, the superhero role-playing game. And Champions was my second role-playing game ever. I thoroughly enjoy the game. But I think that what I need to do is manage that with less players. I need about 2 players for that. I can't, with more, the combat system just slows down too much, and you don't get a chance to really focus on the characters the way you would in kind of a soap opera comic book style, right? So now as for games that I have not got to the table yet, One Ring. So I have been purchasing all the stuff that's come out for the One Ring role-playing game, the most recent version of the Middle-earth basically role-playing stuff published by Cubicle 7. I really love the game. It's got some really interesting travel mechanics, and the source books for it are amazing. Like, they've got these massive sprawling campaigns that feel like campaign books, but also sort of feel like travel logs, I guess. Like, there is a character arc there too, but it does feel very sandboxy as well, in sense that the characters can kind of go and do what they want. So that's really cool. Numenera. So Cypher System is one of these things that I have really been I've been hot and cold on quite a bit. And Numenera, I've purchased a bunch of stuff for the original edition of Numenera, and then I wasn't Kickstarted, but I purchased the second, or maybe it was Kickstarted and I forgot, but I purchased the second edition box set for Numenera as well too. And I've been reading through the stuff, and I really like the game. If you're not familiar with Numenera, Numenera is it's basically a science fantasy game set published by Monty Cook Games. Monty Cook is one of the guys who's heavily involved with, I mean, he's a name in D&D and in gaming circles. If you're not familiar with Monty Cook, just Google his name and you'll find a bunch of very cool stuff that has his name on it. But the game is set at like 8 billion years in the future or something ridiculous, where it is the dawn of the 9th world, and there's 8 worlds before that lay in ruin around you. So there's all these crazy technology things you can, explore. It's like the most extreme kind of transhumanist kind of postmodern version of a post-apocalyptic setting. And it really does try to be, in the most recent version in particular, it's playing up the idea of hopefulness, of hope, that you're going to build communities and things like that. And all of that sounds awesome to me. The books themselves are gorgeous. It's just the setting is so fucking dense, and the books themselves are so heavy with jargon that it's a very dense read, and it's a lot of work to get through the stuff. And when I'm not, thus far, I have not been a massive fan of the Cypher System. Running it is fine because you're really not necessarily interfacing with it a lot, but playing, I just didn't. I've had a hard time with the balancing of different pools that's used. The mechanics of the game are just, I'm not 100% sold on them. But if I'm running the game, I don't need to be. It's the players who need to be sold on it. So what I'm going to want to do in the new year is really dive into Numenera and give it a good try, at least with a one-shot adventure. The character generation for Cypher System and for Numenera is amazing. Like, they're extremely evocative. You come up with really interesting characters, and they've got great ways of tying all the characters together. So it's really just a matter of, if I can bite off a little bit of the world and not feel overwhelmed by the massive amount of stuff that's in there, and just come to terms with the jargon that is associated with the character classes, like by the jargon, what I mean is, you know, they don't call the fighter a fighter; they call it a glaive. You know, and then each of the different classes is similarly, you know, named. There's a fight like a rogue kind of skill monkey called a jack. There's a spellcaster called a nano, and like I understand why they're trying to constantly keep this thing steeped in flavor and thematic elements. But holy crap, does it make it for a really fucking long read? Having to remember, oh, an Arcus is a bard effectively, or like a talky talk character. So when you got that plus trying to learn the darn setting, it's difficult. But that's on my list for the new year. I've been over the Christmas holidays, I've been having the box set sitting next to me and reading through the stuff slowly. I even picked up the player's guide and the other source book to help, you know, get my inspiration going. Twilight 2000 is on my hit list. That one might fall off, only because I am pretty intimidated by the idea of running an accurate military adventure, especially to stream it. I've never been in the military, not associated with the military at all. I have friends who are in the military. I have a couple of friends who are in the military, but I'm not going to harass them about, you know, and they're in the Canadian military for that. So it's not particularly helpful, I think, for me to, you know, pepper them with questions about it. So I've got that on there, but I may have to give a really strong caveat at the start of running that to say, look, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anyone who is actually serving in the way that I'm presenting this. And B, this is going, you know, striving for the same level of authenticity for the military chain of command and blah, 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 as what, you know, say like Die Hard 2 is, you know, but we'll see. The reason that it is high in my on my list is A, because I really loved it from when I was a kid, and B, it's got a really immersive character generation system. I love that, just like the Traveler system, you go through a life path, you meet your character, and then suddenly they're sent off to war. And they might be sent off to war at 18. They might be sent off to war at 56, you know, and that's pretty cool. I also have Doctor Who, another Cubicle 7 game on the list. That's a game that I have thoroughly enjoyed reading, and I have been really intimidated to run that just because to capture the spirit of Doctor Who is, I think, really tricky. You know, to capture what makes up one of those, like what that game is like, can be difficult. And but I have, the one time I have got it to the table, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I find it a very easy game to prepare, very easy game to sort of keep going. So I'm going to try and use a pre-gen adventure again and run that and see how the players like it. One of the things I think is most interesting about that is no formal adventure or XP system. Which is fascinating to me. You just play. You're playing a game. You're not playing a game to gain more powers, gain more levels or whatnot. You're just playing a game to tell stories and have fun. So we'll see how well that goes over. And Travelers like that as well, too, I guess. Star Trek, the 2D20 Star Trek game. I keep hearing fantastic things about that. And Runeslinger has had some very good advice during his RPG Day event for 2018 when he talked about that game. And I love Star Trek. Like I love the old TV series. I've loved them since I was a kid. I love the old, you know, Shatner films. So I think I'd like to try and get that to the table as well. And that's a pretty easy one to teach the players and let them make their own characters for. GURPS Dungeon Fantasy. I recently purchased Hall of Judgment, the game, or the dungeon, I guess, published by Gaming Ballistic. I think it's Douglas Cole. Doug, if I got your name wrong, I got your card right here, but which does not have your name on it. So I think it's Douglas Cole who wrote that. But that combined with my old long-term love of GURPS has me really itching to get that to the table. And I want to see how my players react to it as well, too. It's such a different and more nitty-gritty, you know, game in the sense of, you know, I don't know, it's just a different way of approaching character generation and playing the game than what you do in OSR games or some of the other games that I've run. So I want to get that to the table. I don't think that's a long-term prospect, but I do want to see that back at the table. And Rollmaster. I've got Rollmaster on the list. That's one that I'm not 100% sure on as well. And I'll tell you why. I love the idea of getting that game back to the table to see what a crit focused combat system is like. You know, we ran Rollmaster back in the day, but I mean, like many kids, we didn't run it properly. You know, we kind of fudged the rules and made shit up and whatnot. And I would like to give it a real good shake, because I've most recently, when I started getting the itch to run Rollmaster or look into Rollmaster again, I read some stuff online, and the crit focused element as being like, if you look at it, so for those who are unfamiliar, Rollmaster is this very, very complicated system from the 80s that was sort of originally published as kind of a counterpoint to D&D. Well, originally published as sort of a series of appendices, a different magic system, a different combat system, a different character creation system for people playing AD&D, and then you could eventually just use them all together as well. And excuse me, the way that damage works is you attack, and your attack roll is made on a chart, and then you compare, and then it will tell you if you do any concussive hits, which is kind of like hit points, and then also you may score a critical. And the critical, you then go to another table. So, I mean, it sounds terribly fun already, right? Who doesn't want to look up shit on tables? And then you go to another table, the critical table, you find the type of critical you have, A, B, C, D, E, and then you roll on that table, and then it'll give you a result. And obviously, that is really cumbersome and takes a lot of fucking time to do, so it does slow combat down quite a bit. But I think that with a small group, it could be a lot of fun, because some of the critical results are, most of the critical results are really evocative. Like it's stuff like, scrape across the cheek and it's bleeding, or like you got stabbed in the thigh and whatever, or shattered your femur, or some shit like that. And it gives you some fictional flavor, but also gives you mechanical benefits or mechanical penalties as well too. And there's a lot to do in the game, in the sense of like what a sandbox game is like, where, going out and collecting herbs for treating these various types of wounds. Like there's a massive list of herbs. There's a huge spell book that goes with it as well, called Spell Law. And the trouble, the reason I say I'm not 100% sure on that is because I've been struggling with what setting I use for it. I was thinking I was going to use the old Shadow World setting from what do you call it, from Rollmaster, but I'm not sure that it really, the way you were, I think, would best make use of that is not something I want to do. So, and the other thing is it's got a pretty complex character creation system and a pretty complex combat system, which means I have 2 hurdles to reach for my players. A lot of the games I mentioned, we can do character creation fairly easily and then also play the game. Twilight 2000, we're going to make characters. Numenera, we're going to make characters. One Ring, we're going to make characters. 5 Rings, we'd make characters. Doctor Who, we'd make characters. But some of these other ones, Rollmaster, it's a huge amount of work to, especially for your first character. So huge amount of work for a first character, huge amount of work to learn the system, and then to actually play it only for like a 1 or 2 shot. I'm not sure that that's going to work, but we'll see. I mean, like I still have that sitting next to my bed, and I've been reading this stuff through, trying to, get an idea of what I want to use with it. And the last thing I'll mention, there's 2 other things actually. One is a fairly recent arrival, and that is Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, published by Cubicle 7. Now, regular viewers of the channel may recognize that I've actually run the 3rd edition of Warhammer. It was the one published by Fantasy Flight that used the funny dice and the cards and stuff like that for actions. And I love that game. I've had a lot of fun. The few times I've had a chance to run it, it's been a shit ton of fun. And part of that in particular is the narrative dice. But the other part is I really love this game. Like Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing was, I believe, my 4th or 5th game. I think the order goes D&D, Champions, Marvel Superheroes, and then I think Warhammer. But in any event, Warhammer has so it's got I'm not by any means like an expert in the Warhammer lore or anything like that. I didn't really get into 2nd edition of the fantasy role playing. I ran the 1st edition just with the core rulebook for a lot of years, on and off. But it's a book also that I use so much that it literally fell apart. Like the spine fell off and pages started falling out. I read that book so much. So when this came out, it was pretty obvious I was going to get it. This seems very much like a closer in mechanics and stuff like that to the original version of Warhammer Fantasy or 2nd edition, I guess, because I understand those are pretty similar. but it's also got some pretty cool innovations that I recognize from One Ring and from other Cubicle 7 role-playing games, something with a more kind of narrative approach to it. And they've got a new way of managing careers and stuff like that in it. And I love it. Like, the art is incredibly evocative. It's a book that, like, I think a lot of us get when we get a certain role-playing book and you just like, oh my God, I can't wait to, I put this down. I want to keep reading it and reading it. You know, the Five Rings 4th edition was like that for me. Iron Kingdom's role-playing game was like that for me. Delta Green was like that for me, where I picked it up and I was like, I need to run this right now. Adventure Conquer King, I'm looking around to see what other things. Adventure Conquer King was like that as well, too. Godbound was honestly like that as well. Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers was like that as well. So this is a game that I really, really want to get to the table. And last but not least is, of course, the Granddaddy, and the most recent version of the Granddaddy. So the sexy, buffed up Granddaddy of role-playing, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So I have not run a lot of D&D 5th edition on the channel, partly because I have so many other games that I'm interested in, and partly because so many other people stream D&D 5th edition. So if you want that content, there's tons of it out there. But one of my players has specifically asked that I do that, and run that as part of a charity request he had. So I'm going to be looking at running 5th edition D&D in the new year as well. Probably to start with a Midgard a Midgard one-shot. But I've also got a project that I've been poking at leading up to the new year that I'm really going to start working more seriously on, which is, now I don't know what this is going to end up as. I think that it might end up as a electronic publication at some point. But we'll see. What I don't want to do is set a deadline for myself to have this done. I just want to let it come together as we're playing. I know that's the least productive way of getting something done, but I'm doing it as a labor of love, not a job. So I just want to let it come together. But the name of the product is going to be Guns in the Dwarflands. And the Guns in the Dwarflands is going to start as basically a sandbox adventure. It's going to start... it will basically take, not a sandbox. Sorry, I've talking to friends about this, and I'm saying it's not a sandbox. It's a homestead campaign. And the difference in my mind to that is kind of like the difference between Star Trek Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Star Trek Next Generation, you go out and you keep exploring and traveling and finding things. DS9, the adventure comes to you. And that's what I wanted to set up with this homestead campaign. It basically, the adage with a lot of sandbox games is that town needs to be boring, because otherwise you've got no reason to leave. If players can find adventure in town, they'll just stay there. And I guess the answer to this, or the response from this type of campaign, from the homestead campaign, is to say, okay, yep, that's fine. But in order to do that, what I want to do is I've got some tentative ideas of how to connect the characters to the hometown, how to invest them in it, how to make them feel like they're a meaningful part of that, give them interesting things to do in town with different factions and things like that. And then the setting itself as well is going to incorporate a lot of my favorite elements, including politics and history and religion and, gray morality. The setting is basically, the nutshell is that roughly, give or take, about 10,000 years ago, the dwarves and the elves fought some massive war. And at the very end of that war, while the elves were sieging the dwarf kingdoms hidden in their mountains, they turned to druidic magic to basically starve them out. They poisoned and sterilized all the food stocks and fungi and whatnot that the dwarves were resting on. So where they were defeated, the dwarves had to surrender. And since that time, they've been driven. Some of the dwarf kind, stayed in the depths of the mountains, but they turned to darker ways of sustaining themselves. So the rest of them became, left, and because of the elven magics, they found themselves living in a land that was very desolate and rocky and mountainous, and they split basically into the desert tribes, or desert clans, the hill clans, and the mountain clans. And in the intervening years, the other nations have seen this area just as the dwarf lands. It's not really a kingdom. It's just a collection of clans and these forgotten dwarf holes and whatnot. The last king of the dwarves was originally derisively called the Worm King, WORM, the Worm King, for, living beneath the earth and living, on eating worms is effectively what they said. But he went missing. And now, about 100 years ago, there began in the midst of the Dwarflands, while the rest of the world has really advanced, there are, empires that basically you can think of the technology level as equivalent to close to like Victorian levels of technology. There's repeating guns, there's, steam operations and whatnot, but the Dwarflands are pretty much forgotten. They're left behind. They are, for the most part, the dwarves just fight these internecine clan wars and things like that. About 100 years ago, this new cult came called the Cult of the Worm King, WYRM, and WURM, the Cult of the Worm King. And they started trying to basically going around in the Dwarflands, trying to unify and rally the clans together to draw on dwarven heritage. And then about 10 years ago, the Cult of the Worm King perpetrated a massive magical attack on one of the advanced nations. And that led about 4 or 5 years ago to a allied response of everyone coming in to crush the Worm King, to crush the nascent dwarven kingdom that the Cult of the Worm King had driven together. Unfortunately, it's a very difficult and difficult terrain to get through. There's fractious tribes and so forth, and so it was difficult to find alliances to effectively fight their way through to find this guy. And in addition, over time, the alliances between the different nations that came have sort of frayed as well. In addition, there being specific reasons, each of the different nations has their own interests for going in. So that's the backdrop, and what the adventure will do. The first adventure is called Will of the Worm King, and the Guns in the Dwarflands. This product, at least in my mind, is going to give you tools to, in the same way that Barrel Maze gives you really great ways of generating dungeon content randomly and stuff like that. It will give you a good baseline of what you can use for your hometown, for how you can situate your characters in there. It will have a clear, strong voice in the sense very much like what Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers has, where there is a world. It's got specific sensibilities. There's a specific history to it. You're gonna be able to make use of the rules components separately for your own campaigns, but if you want to play in that world, that'll be there. And the rules will provide you ways you can bolt it on to your campaigns as well too. So in my mind, it's going to be I'm going to develop it mechanically with 5th edition D&D in mind, because it's the most popular thing out there, and blah blah blah. But I'm going to make sure that all the different things that are part of that game that are the rules component can be taken off and bolted on to any other game you wanted, any other OSR type game you would want to use it with. So that way you can use it with your favorite type of, or to be honest, I mean Pathfinder as well. I'm not going to write like rules for Pathfinder, mind you. But this stuff, at least, I foresee it being a way for you to just take these rules and bolt them onto your own game. I know there's a lot of other games that offer like domain management stuff. In particular, Matt Colville very famously, developed a pretty great one. But I'm seeing these as being a little looser. I want them to be a little more about you finding your way in your community, more so than you building your domain or your stronghold or whatever. It's I've got a connection to the blacksmiths in town because my father was a blacksmith. I have a uncle who was part of the ran with the desert tribes. It's got some other, I think, hopefully some interesting stuff as well too. I'm going to be really playing up the idea of human fecundity. So there's going to be half dwarves, half orcs. Half orcs are basically the orcs themselves were basically bred into annihilation or crossbred into annihilation because of miscegenation. So the half orcs are pretty much the what you would find and think of when you think of orcs. There's going to be some cool goats that the different different dwarves are going to have access to as well. So like desert style camelish type rams that they'll use, and more rugged hilly ones, and big tall bushy mountain ones and stuff like that. But in any event, that's one of the other projects I'm going to work on, and 5th edition is what I'm going to be focusing my that's what I'm going to be focusing my 5th edition efforts in, is for this Guns in the Dwarflands idea. So anyway, that is so. I guess the other thing is the gaming marathon is going to be in June as well. And I don't know what game I'm going to run just yet for that. I tend to start thinking about it in January, and then I'll settle on something by around like February or so, or March, and then I'll completely throw things out by May. So who knows what that'll be? But that's definitely coming up in the new year as well. And that's kind of it, I guess. I'm looking at my list here. Oh, and reviews. So I have really fallen down on my reviews in the last little while. And what I'm going to do in the new year is schedule reviews every second Sunday for the let's see here. It'll be the Sundays when we are not, or the weekends when we're not playing Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. So yeah, so that may seem like an awful lot to be planned for 2019, but looking back, we got through an awful lot in 2018. So I think that if I keep this list up and I keep these games in mind, then there's a much better chance of me actually getting to them. I'm also sharing this with my players as well to play on their enthusiasm. When there's games that they really want to try or really want to play, that will help play things along. And of course, the viewers. If you folks are enjoying certain games more than other games, that certainly helps us maintain interest in running them. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to go see if I can wake up my son right now. So for those who are listening at home, if you're listening live, Merry Christmas to you. Thank you so much for viewing and for joining us on the channel. For those who may be listening at another time, thanks for such a great 2018. I look forward to continuing on in 2019. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding the session, please don't hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section below, or you can reach me on Twitter at Dungeon Musings, all one word in plural, or you can shoot me an email at dungeonmusings@gmail.com. I guess I didn't mention this because it's not really part of the YouTube channel, but I'm continuing on with the Dungeon Musings podcast into the new year as well. Those tend to come out on Thursdays because that seems to be the time when I've got time, and I'm most likely to be in the mind set to be recording. So if you want to listen to the podcast as well too, it deals more with kind of big picture gaming stuff than what I do on the channel here. You can find it on any of your favorite podcast platforms as Dungeon Musings. So anyway, happy holidays, everybody. Merry Christmas. And I will look forward to seeing you all again in the new year. Thanks for watching and happy gaming.